There we go. Okay, so I am speaking with Vladan Lausevic. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Sure. So,
Okay, good. I wanted to talk to you about this idea that occurred to me as I was taking this course in machine learning. And it has to do with game A and game B. And for those who don't know, game A, and feel free to correct me if at any point during this, but the way I understand game A, it's the current system, the zero-sum games that are out there. It basically represents capitalism, hierarchical frameworks, traditional frameworks that we see in classrooms, that we see in large institutions, in corporate institutions, and in governments. And arguably, this has led us to the hyper-competitive, hyper-capitalist world and system that we're living in now, which can be at times very predatory and can be harmful to some individuals. It's not necessarily good for economic equality. It's not solving certain problems like poverty and addiction, and it's leading arguably to climate change. And so over the last several years, there's been talk about this game B movement, which means a lot of things to a lot of different people. But the way I understand that, these are better frameworks, not as necessarily competitive, where there's a kind of a lateral distribution of power. They're more self-organizing and they're more equitable. And so while taking this machine learning course, I was somewhat searching for, all right, there's a lot of thought leadership out there in the world. There are a lot of people who are defining these terms way more eloquently than anything I can do. And they're making a lot of sense, and they've kind of zeroed in on the problem, but what we still don't have is a bridge between game A and game B environments. Like, we understand the problem, but how do we get these new frameworks in place? So I'm taking a machine learning course, and in one of the classes, they're talking about these genetic, in one of the classes, they're talking about genetic algorithm, which is based on, these evolutionary principles that, only the strongest survive. There was this one part of the class where they were setting up a maze, and there was like 500 fish that had to go through the maze, and they were using this if-then logic, so that the fish learns that if something is above you, go down. If something is below you, go up. And then you run this 1,000 iterations, and those who learn quickly live. Those who don't learn the system perish. There was another slide where she showed all these human characters on this platform. And this is the part that stopped me in my thinking and made my jaw kind of drop and made me wonder why nobody in the class was raising their hand and saying, wait, what are we doing here? It's almost like they were blindly going along with what the professor was saying. And what she said was, we need to make sure that we use a genetic algorithm and that we keep all the characters on the platform, and that we use this system so that, it's still using game A rules, even though you could possibly, this is the part where I need your technical expertise. In machine learning class, I don't think as a teacher, there is any form of learning unless there's curiosity, unless there's the ability to ask questions like, is this the most effective system? Could we create a more equitable game so that all the fish or all the humans in the game win? But that's never the question. Like, let's keep repeating game A models. Even though we have new technology, let's bring everything from the old system into the new. So that over several thousand iterations, sure, we get winners, but now they're digital winners. And they're still playing, this game A system. And I'm just thinking, well, number one, if you have a possibility of getting your characters off the platform and creating a new type of platform, why aren't we trying to do that? Or why aren't we trying to teach, digital characters or actors in a digital environment how to ask questions? Otherwise, there is no learning. And so I'm thinking that's the reason why Game A is stuck in Game A is because every time we come across a new system, what we think is going to be new, it may be a new technology, but we're taking the old philosophy and we're inserting it into the into the new technology, and we expect that there's going to be change, but there's no change. It's like, okay, perfect example is blockchain. Well, that opened up the door to this kind of lateral distribution, pro-democracy, pro-human involvement, yet it becomes popular because of all the speculation and all the talk about how much money people can make by speculating in these crypto markets. Anyway, I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Absolutely. So for the start, I can say partly because I'm a historian in my basics is that one important thing I learned when studying history is that history doesn't really, repeat itself, because what repeats itself is human nature. And human nature also includes human stupidity. And human stupidity has many examples, like everything from, believing that, I would say, let's say homosexuals are sick, to let's say that certain diseases were invented by, how to say, security agencies, to believing in, believing in the devil, or things like that. So there's a long history, or let's say the history of human stupidity as long as human history in general. And this is why often, like, when we create new systems, we have to realize that technology itself is neutral, because it can be used for different purposes. For example, the barbed wire was used both in the Wild West for like making peaceful agreements between colonizers. Like, okay, here's my part of land, here's your part of land, like, let's not be in conflict. And barbed wire was also used like during the First World War, and it was used for concentration camps in Nazi Germany. Now, the nasty thing, let's say, with the artificial intelligence, machine learning, is that it can be applied in a similar way. It can be used for for healthcare systems, for education, for improving humanity in general, if you're speaking about human progress. Or it can be used for mass surveillance. It can be used for digital dictatorship, as in China. It all depends on how we as humans decide morally and ethically how to behave towards technology. And this is the case, for example, with some modern intellectuals, let's say like Yuval Harari. He argues, and it's more actually of a warning than an argument, that one problem at the moment is that those who are developing, let's say, the artificial intelligence are individuals who are very skilled when it comes to tech and technology and new gadgets, systems, programming, and so on. But in many cases, maybe even in the most of cases, they do not have a single course in their education about ethics, about, let's say, philosophy, about more, let's say, existential psychological aspects. And this is also very important, because when we speak about algorithms, it's something that we, let's say, in one way have it in our own bodies. Like, we have genes, we have genetics. Our behaviors are very much like, we don't have, let's say, 100% free will, because our behaviors can be very, at some degree, can be kind of very deterministic. This is one reason why in politics, let's say, some people are more let's say some are more libertarian, some are more authoritarian, some are more individualist, some are more collectivist. Partly it can be because of your own experiences as in childhood or like in your adult life, or because of your how to say real life situations that you went through. But it can also be like in some way connected to certain, let's say, biology and psychology and so on. And here's also one very interesting thing that, like, if you look on the human nature, so the argument, like in the studies of moral psychology, is that we are very tribal, in our human nature. We are very authoritarian. We are very scared of the stranger, of the foreigner. Um, we are very, how to say, it's easier for humans to be pessimistic. It's easier for humans to be negative than to be positive. It takes much more effort to convince people to be more, let's say, optimistic, to be more positive, to kind of be more how to say peaceful with each other. So this is also kind of a challenge if we now speak about finding new solutions, if you speak about governance, technology, organizing. Because, for example, you mentioned about the zero sum game, and this is the thing. For example, if you look on certain ideologies as nationalism and let's say protectionism, if you speak about trade, because it's based on perceptions, on very false, mythological beliefs that our group is going to lose if the second group wins. While, let's say, the ideas around, let's say, market economy have been more about that, economy is a plus sum game, that more and more individuals can benefit through time and cooperations and interactions. So I would say that if you now speak about, let's say, the AI, it's very crucial that we as whole humanity can use the AI for actually cooperation, decentralization, and a plus sum mindset. That this is a technology that could really benefit more or less every human, because we can really use it for, let's improving quality of life, living standards, reducing poverty, reducing mortality, improving healthcare systems. Or we can use it for the exactly opposite, for self-destruction, for mass murders, mass atrocities, genocide, totalitarian governance, dictatorships, and so on. So as I say, like this, we have to realize that kind of, unfortunately, I think that as long as there are humans, our nature is going to be quite same. There will always be some kind of stupidity, or how to say, ideas that certain groups should be destroyed or should be kind of eliminated or thrown out from the society. And this is the danger. But it can be handled, let's say, if more and more people can be involved in aspects as, let's say, how to say, kind of modern education, decentralizing technologies like blockchain, cryptocurrencies, that more people can cooperate. They can create their own communities, create even more sense of, let's say, global solidarity, global cooperation, and how to say, yeah, it's pretty much that. There is a need to change some of the game A, because we have to realize that the how to say, for the last, let's say, 300 years, like humanity, at least in, not in all parts of the world, but let's say in the most parts of the world now, has went through, like, agricultural society, as in Europe and North America, then industrial revolution as in 19th century, and then we have, let's say, kind of a more second industrial revolution, like after Second World War. Now we have more, let's say, post-industrial development. And here's the case now that maybe, let's say, I would say, to be more honest, hopefully, ideas of cooperation could become more prominent than competition. Because I think that if we speak now about self-organizing, about humanity, about being more plus sum instead of zero sum, that cooperation, as by using the AI, can be very extremely beneficial and crucial for the future of the planet. Because this kind of debate goes back already, let's say, 200 years ago. For example, you had the Charles Darwin that was emphasizing on the evolution and competition, the survival of the fittest. Then you have, let's say, some other, intellectuals, philosophers like Kropotkin, who argued that actually cooperation is better than competition, because instead of, let's say, having more stressful lives and thinking that other humans are your enemy or your, competitors, humans could just focus on cooperating in all aspects of, let's say, their daily lives. I would say that kind of competition had a upper hand as during 19th, 20th century, because partly because more and more people, as in, let's say, Europe, United States, but also later in South America and in Africa today, they started leaving, the countryside, villages, moving into cities, industrial areas, urbanization. And there you had to be kind of more competitive in order to get a job. You had to kind of be more, faster to kind of readopt yourself. Now things with, let's say, blockchain and crypto is that you can actually be more cooperative in the sense that you can, for example, you can be a digital nomad, or you can organize your communities where you want to solve different problems. It doesn't matter if you're living in a big city or on the countryside, as long as you have internet. You can actually do magnificent, wonderful things. Create markets, create, let's say, projects as for climate transformation or social problems. You can create more democratic governance as by citizen budget, or let's say co-created budget. So I think that the game B, as you mentioned, it is completely possible maybe in the following, let's say, 20, 30, 40 years. It's actually our near future, so to say, in a more post-industrial and even post-material development.
Right. Well said. And I would only point out, though, that there's one part of this that I still found kind of interesting and concerning, which is that there is such a thing as this genetic algorithm, and it is used in technology, and that there are programmers who, like, there is a certain decision-making point where you decide, okay, what type of algorithm are we going to use on this game or this project or this program? And they go with something that's been tried and tested. I think it's a psychological reason, which is fear of the unknown. We don't want to unleash something. So, for example, when I used my game, and I started experimenting this at a time when you didn't take an entire curriculum, an entire course, and say, I'm going to open this up so that we're partners. We're all working on this together. We're going to create a game to cover all the content. This could go wildly wrong, and I'll be out of my job in 2 weeks' time, because it could just go completely chaotic. And it's the same thing that my director was concerned about when I was teaching over in China, which is that you're giving students too much autonomy here in decision making, and this could go terribly wrong. That's a fear-based reaction. It's psychological. It's not necessarily based on any logic, but it's our human inability to kind of deal with the unknown and what might happen, rather than try to understand it and know that as humans we can solve it. We can work around this. And I just found it curious that here is this moment when you can be incredibly imaginative and try to work with a large group of intelligent students who are in this person's machine learning class and say, let's come up with a new type of algorithm. This is our opportunity to break through. I mean, I want to give you the basics, but she's limiting human thought by predetermining what they're going to be doing in that class. And I found that a real disservice, not only to those students, but to humanity. When you tell your students, I'm going to limit your range of thought right here, that your algorithm must be a genetic algorithm. I mean, we have the CRISPR program that came out of China. I don't know where that's going to go, but it's saying, look, we were given this. I mean, we're competitive because partly it is genetic, and partly we are where we are with all the tensions in the world because we're operating at the limits of our genetic capacity. That in order to move this species into the next generation and to the generation after that, we're programmed to be competitive, to survive. It's part of our survival mechanism, but it's also possible to overcome that. Athletes, for example, in competition can get along. They can do things in the name of spirit and cooperation so that after the race or the event is over, they can maintain their friendships. That takes a certain degree of effort and emotional intelligence. Students can, I had one group of students in a class where they decided that they weren't going to approach this game competitively. They just wanted to keep it going in perpetuity. Like, we're going to keep this going because this is a more fun way to learn. But if we bring this to a conclusion early, it's going to end the game. We have to go back to regular style learning. So they wanted to keep just the process going. It'd be like people playing a ping pong match where they just want to rally. They never want to actually compete, but they love the rally. So I don't know. I just thought this is going to be the problem with transitioning from one environment to the next, is overcoming this psychology, this inhibition to create these new environments which are more equitable, this lateral distribution. I might have mentioned this before, but as we've seen, Google, Microsoft, a lot of these major tech companies would give employees 10 to 20% of their own time to create products of their own, which are oftentimes more creative than anything they would do if forced to create something by the company. And so they would use that time. They would really look forward to that time. And then I was also told by, I did study Russian, East Central European studies in college, part of my my concentration. And I remember one of my professors saying that 30% of the land was private, 70% was collectivized. The 30% often outproduced the 70%. Now that makes a good argument for right wing.
Yeah.
For anyone who believes in libertarianism, on the right, but it also shows that there is some truth to that when you take pride in ownership, when you participate, and you can find a personal relevancy to something, you become a lot more productive.
Yeah, this is really the case. I actually wanted to, like, when you started speaking about that, I wanted to mention that because I'm also studying about the history of the Soviet Union, and I myself, I grew up, I was born in, it was still Yugoslavia at that time, and my father he told me a lot of stories about how it was like with this, let's say, these local self-management in Yugoslavia, like kind of these cooperatives. And one thing I learned, like already in my childhood, was that people can be very creative and do fantastic things, but if there's a system that is kind of discouraging creativeness, discouraging freedom, or limiting us, then people are just not going to produce so good, let's say, products or ideas or systems. And this was the case, let's say, in the communist countries, that there were individuals with ideas, but you have to leave, let's say, to Germany or to France or United States in order to make a success, because the system where you're living at was, somehow preventing you and even kind of punishing you if you were, too creative, too ambitious. And the thing here we speak about, let's say, as you mentioned, the algorithms. I think that we, like in this case for the game B, there's a need for, let's say, some kind of a, Kropotkin algorithm, or kind of a co-creative algorithm, because as humans, like, we are kind of both, let's say, we have our personal needs and our personal, let's say, values and so on, but at the same time we are very social animals. We need communities, we need to be, sense of feeling that we, identify ourselves with a collective, or a polity, or as a nation or similar, or the world as a whole. And we need both of these kind of spheres to be in balance. So sometimes, I know how it is for me personally. Sometimes I just like to be here in my own, let's say, safe space, like intellectual or hobby space, and sometimes I just want to go out and meet other people, interact. And I would say this is also crucial for the game, that you have a, let's say, continuous development, and when you're part of the game, when you're gaming, in your gaming mode, then you are cooperating. It's a little bit like there is a big, how you call it, this picture, like a puzzle picture, made of different pieces, and then you come there, you put some pieces, and then somebody else puts it, and third person, eighth person comes, and you're all enjoying and doing that together. And then when you feel tired, like, okay, now I need to go back to my home, my apartment, my retreat, I don't know, like cave, something, then you have freedom to do that. So you do your thing, you're alone, you maybe do some meditation, reflection, thinking, you relax, then you can go back, play the game. It's maybe some fresh new ideas. And so this is kind of, the thing is, like, how to say, the thing with a competition is that there is always a deadline. There is always a finish when you are competing. Yeah, there's a finish line. But here the idea, I think, is to create a game where there is no finish line, because the game is just constantly developing. And here we can go back to the original idea of the open society by Karl Popper. As Popper argued, the open society is never going to be perfect. It's never going to be finished. There is no deadline for an open society. Well, maybe technically speak, if sun as our one of the biggest stars in the galaxy, if it explodes someday and we don't have an artificial one, then of course there is a deadline for the whole planet. But the point of Popper was that the open society doesn't have a how to say, doesn't have a deadline, doesn't have like the best before date, because it's about continuously discussing ideas, experimenting, trying out what's working, what's not working, and not making any, let's say, how you call it, like dogmatic conclusions, like dogmatic truths, because we have to, let's say, create more contemporary truths and principles, so we are able to change them when we realize, as a community or humanity as a whole, that okay, these things are not working. We have to try find something else. And as you mentioned before, the thing is that in our, let's say, human psychology and nature, kind of, we don't really like changes. We are more prone to conserving things as they are. We don't really like, when symbols and constructions around us are changing. We kind of like to stick to them and try to preserve them, so to say.
Right. Yeah, we're like I said, we're up against the limits of our human abilities. I mean, there's a lot of examples. You can't create a car that goes 500 miles an hour because no human being can drive that speed. Much the same as we won't have aircraft that flies 4,000 miles per hour because you can't maneuver. So we're up against our capacities, but I guess we're just going to have to get more creative. And what I was going to say also in response to this is that we need to, we're gamifying maybe all the wrong things. Like if you have students in a class and you're trying to create a game about fish going through a maze, when you could in fact be creating a game on how to make economic systems more equitable around the world, or how to solve, I mean, because I know such things exist. They're out there, in terms of like you could have a global competition on reducing carbon emissions, or in solving global poverty and homelessness, or in creating a more sustainable, low cost home, or what to do with rising sea levels. Whatever it is, you can turn that into a cooperative game. And if you want to make it competitive, then you could create it where one team is against another team. So whichever team creates the best outcome. So I don't know. I just don't think we're teaching the right courses in our schools. We could be simultaneously teaching while solving these problems.
And this is also another, let's say, challenge, is that many things that people are learning in schools at the moment are, if you speak now about methods, information, insights, are things that, could be quite outdated, like in only maybe 20 years. And this also has to do with the pace of the technology, the tempo of change. And I noticed this from my personal experience when we speak about education. And it's only like, if I only compare how things were like in Sweden, let's say 10 years ago, and how things are now, if we speak about social media, digitalization, and so on. Anyway, I really believe there is a case for, let's say, gamification of education, because it can motivate more humans, like inspired to cooperate and kind of solve problems that otherwise are, if we didn't have, let's say, decentralizing technology, or internet, would be very extremely hard to solve. If you speak now about, let's say, awareness about climate change, or let's say how to deal with certain, let's say, transparency, integrity problems. Like, for example, let's say there are at this moment, like, I think there's almost 1 billion people, according to certain estimates as by the World Bank. So basically one how you call it, like, at the moment, like, a very large part of the human population doesn't have a valid identity, in a sense of, you have a passport or ID card, or like some kind of a, let's say, digital paper. And we are technically living in the 21st century, but many humans don't even have that. And I think this, like, the game B could be a game changer, for the planet as a whole. So
Well, that's a good place to leave it. There's so much more to discuss, and I know you have to get to another event. We'll just call it that.
Yeah, we'll continue gaming next time. So
so I'm just going to stop the recording at this point, and we'll pick it up soon. And so yeah, thanks for participating in the discussion, and hopefully we raised some good questions.
yeah, absolutely. That's the whole idea. So thanks.